The regular season is just a few days away, so it's finally time to give my 2021 NFL season predictions. We're going to go over every team's record predictions and even playoff predictions at the end, so stick around and see what I got to say about your team. If you like this kind of content, leave a like and subscribe because I got all kinds of things planned for this season that you don't want to miss. Now we're going to go division by division, starting with the NFC North. Coming in last in the division, I got the Lions. Now this shouldn't be too surprising. And the Lions have had a good offseason. I like some of the moves they made, but the overall talent of the roster just isn't where it needs to be for this team to have a good record. So I got them going 4-13, finishing last in the division. Now coming in next, we got the Bears going 7-10. Now Justin Fields is my guy. I had him as the third best QB in this draft and a top 5 talent, so I thought he was a steal going to 11. I think he's honestly going to be starting by week 3 or 4 at the latest, but as much as I love Justin Fields, there's definitely some holes on this roster, namely the offensive line. Now, I love the Tevin Jenkins pick in the second round, and I think if he can stay healthy, then he'll be a great piece for that line for years to come. But one player doesn't make the good offensive line. There's still questions on pretty much every other position on that group. And as much as I love Fields and as much as I love what he can do on the ground, you still need some kind of consistent blocking if you want sustained success in the NFL, and I don't know if the Bears are going to be able to provide that. On top of that, the secondary has worse now since they cut Kyle Fuller, and they also have a pretty tough schedule. It's not terrible, it's not as bad as some other teams we'll go over later, but it's definitely not an easy schedule by any means. So all in all, I like this team. I think they got potential. I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up as a playoff team, but I got them 7-10 for now. Now, coming in second with an 8-9 record, we got the Vikings. Now, I was honestly really surprised when I had this team with a losing record because I really like this roster and what they've done over the offseason. The offensive line is much improved from last year with the addition of Christian Darrisaw, which is very important for their scheme, which relies a lot on running the ball and play action passes. So the offensive line is a key factor, and they did a good job to improve that. Now, at the end of the day, ultimately, this is just another case of a team having a really tough schedule, as they have to play the NFC West, which is, in my opinion, by far the best division in the league, and the AFC North, which is the best division in the AFC. So this is a good roster that I think is just unfortunately going to be hurt by their schedule. I think they're better than their record would indicate, but I don't see them finishing much higher than that. I wouldn't be surprised if they made the playoffs, but I'm not predicting it. So of course I have the Packers winning the division at 10-7 and getting the 4th seed in the NFC. Now I know what you're thinking. 10-7 seems like a really low win total, and I honestly agreed because I expected this team to finish much better when I was going through the schedule. But there's definitely some reasons to be concerned going forward. Losing Corey Linsley in free agency is a massive blow to this offense, which, just like the Vikings, relies heavily on the run game and play action. So there's definitely reasons to think that this offense might take a step back from where it was at last year. And on top of that, I don't think there's any spot on this roster that you can definitively point to and say they improved at. It's mainly the same roster as last year, but older and losing without Corey Linsley. So they still have Aaron Rodgers. They still have a great head coach. They still have a great offensive scheme. They still have playmakers on defense. So they'll still be a really good team, and they'll be competing for a Super Bowl. But I don't know if they have what it takes to actually get there. Now, moving on to the NFC East, I've got the Eagles finishing last with a 2-15 record. Now, I know I just pissed off the entire city of Philadelphia, so let me explain myself. Now, this roster isn't terrible. They actually have some good offensive playmakers for once, but the defense doesn't really have anything going for it other than a solid defensive line. Like, this is the worst linebacker core in the NFL, and the secondary isn't really anything to write home about. Like, Darius Slay was supposed to be that guy last year, and he just wasn't. He's definitely not the same lockdown corner he was in Detroit. But the most important thing for this record is Jalen Hurts. If he can take a step forward and become an actual good NFL QB, then they'll definitely finish better than 2-15. But personally, I don't have much faith in that happening. So for now, I have them finishing last in the division at 2-15. Coming in third in the division, I got the Giants going 6-11. Now, this team definitely has some upside with the improvements they made to their wide receiver core. And if things go well, they could have a top 10 defense, but they still have Daniel Jones as their QB. Much like the Eagles, the main reason I'm low on the Eagles is because of their quarterback. Same with the Giants. Main reason I'm low on the Giants is because of their quarterback. He hasn't really shown much reason for optimism, even with the improved receiving core. So until Daniel Jones can prove that he can elevate the team around him, I don't see this team being much better than this. I think they could maybe go 8-9 at best, unless Daniel Jones has a serious breakout this season. But they won't be terrible. They'll probably have a lot of close games, but I don't see them much better than 6-11. Now, number 2 is where things get interesting, because I have the Washington football team going 8-9. I know a lot of people expect this team to win the division, and I'm not too surprised by that. They definitely have by far the best defense in the division, probably a top 5 unit in the league. They definitely have that kind of upside for this season, but they still have Ryan Fitzpatrick as their quarterback. And I know y'all getting tired of me just talking about the QBs in this division, but that's a fact. Every team in this division has questions at quarterback for some reason or another. And Ryan Fitzpatrick is definitely better than what they had last year, but he's still not a guy you can consistently rely on for 17 games. So I would not be surprised at all if this team made the playoffs. They have a very talented roster, but Ryan Fitzpatrick combined with the lackluster offensive line, it's not terrible. It probably won't get in their way or anything, but you could definitely do better. So overall, I think this team is really good, but I think they're going to disappoint some people. Now, all this, of course, means that I have the Cowboys winning the division at 11-6 with the 3 seed in the NFC. And I know a lot of people think 11-6 is crazy for the Cowboys, but this team is absolutely loaded on offense. And in 2021, you need to be good on offense if you want sustained success. And people love to bring up, oh, the defense is so terrible. It's a terrible defense. You can't win with that defense. But they weren't even the worst defense in the league last year. And 2, they had all kinds of injuries on both sides of the ball, but especially on defense. They had Tristan Hill, Leighton Van Der Esch, Trayvon Diggs, Chidobe Awuzie, and Gerald McCoy before the season were all starters that got hurt at some point in the season and missed a significant portion of it. So you get all those guys back besides McCoy and Awuzie, and you fire Mike Nolan and bring in Micah Parsons to improve the front 7, who he can line up as a linebacker, edge rusher, he can blitz from the linebacker position, he can line up all over the defense, so that adds versatility. And you bring in Dan Quinn to hopefully simplify the scheme a bit, make things easier, so these young defenders aren't constantly second guessing themselves thinking about where they need to be positioned. And the defense should be I think it won't be elite or anything, but it could absolutely be a top 20 defense in the league, which is all you really need when you have all this talent on offense. So when you combine all that with, at worst, a top 3 offense in the league, and you have a fairly easy schedule compared to some of the other teams we've discussed, this team is going to be much better than a lot of people expect. Moving on to the NFC South, I've got the Falcons finishing in last with a 4-13 record. Now, I think this offense will be really good. They brought in Arthur Smith as their new head coach, who I think is a great offensive mind, but they also have some questions. The offensive line should be decent, but not much better than that. And I love Calvin Ridley as much as the next guy, but there are some questions as to whether he can be the number 1 receiver in that offense. He's without a doubt a very talented receiver, but he hasn't had to step up into that alpha position before. I think he can, but it's still yet to be proven. So there you have some questions about that. And then the defense is still not good. You have Grady Jarrett and Deion Jones, and that's about it. AJ Terrell hasn't been too great since he got drafted. There's definitely, I'm not giving up on him or anything, but you have concerns. Matt Ryan also isn't the same guy that he used to be, so there's concerns as to whether he can make the most of this talent on offense. And overall, in a tough division, I just don't see them having a very good season this year. I think they have a ton of talent on the offensive side of the ball and a ton of upside for the future, but not much for this season. Next up is the Panthers, who I have finishing 5-12, so just one win better than the Falcons. And like a lot of other teams we've gone over so far, this depends a lot on the quarterback. Sam Darnold obviously was not good in New York, but there's definitely reasons to believe he could step it up here in Carolina. First things first, this is by far the most offensive talent he's ever had. You got DJ Moore, Terrace Marshall, Robbie Anderson, and Christian McCaffrey. Those four are all really good playmakers. You have questions at tight end. You don't really have a definite guy at the position, so there's concerns there. And the offensive line is my main concern for this team because it's not good, in my opinion. They definitely made strides to try and improve it, but bringing in guys like Pat Elflein is not the kinds of moves you want to make to drastically improve this line from where it was last year. This defense is also still very young. It's definitely promising. You got guys like Brian Burns, who is a up-and-coming edge rusher in the league. He was very good last year. Underrated. I don't think enough people were talking about him last year. You've also got J.C. Horn, who is one of the best corners in this draft. And you've got Derek Brown on the interior, who hopefully can step things up a bit. Last year he was good, but not the guy you expected with, I think, the 7th or 8th overall pick. So if he can take a step forward, that would be huge for that defense. And then, of course, Jeremy Chin. He was getting a little bit of buzz for Defensive Player of the Year, but, obviously Chase Young is that dude. So that didn't happen. But yeah, overall, I want this team to exceed my expectations for them. I actually kind of like the Panthers. They're not my favorite team, but I like them. But I just don't see Sam Darnold being good enough to elevate this team, especially behind that offensive line. It's, again, not terrible, but not very good either. And I think the defense still has some room to grow. So I think next year they could be really good, especially if they finish like this. They'll have a high draft pick. They can get a good QB in the draft. So definitely reason for optimism in the future. Not so much this season. Now, finishing 9-8 and sneaking in as the 7th seed in the playoffs, I got the New Orleans Saints. There's a lot of questions about this team after the departure of Drew Brees. How can Jameis Winston step up and fulfill that void at QB? But I think learning from Drew Brees, learning from Sean Payton for a year, I think hopefully expanding the offense, more vertically to take advantage of Winston's strengths at throwing downfield. That should make things easier on him. They have an elite offensive line, like top 3 at worst. And they have a lot of talent on defense, especially along the line with the addition of Peyton Turner in the draft, which I thought that was a bit of a reach, but he's like your 3rd best edge rusher, so you could definitely do a lot worse than that. You still got Demario Davis, Marshawn Lattimore. They somehow brought back Marcus Williams, once again proving that the salary cap is a myth. But yeah, they got a lot of talent on defense. The biggest question for this offense is the weapons in the passing game, because you obviously have Alvin Kamara, who's at worst the 2nd best receiving back in the league, but you don't really have any proven guys outside of that. You have Marquez Callaway, who flashed in the preseason. You've got Deontay Harris. You've got Traquan Smith, but you don't have any people that have proven that they can really step up and be a good receiver for them. So you need some more consistency there, since Michael Thomas is going to miss the first part of the season. But I think Sean Payton is a good enough offensive mind. He'll find some ways to get these guys open, just scheme up productivity for these guys. And I think they'll be decent until Michael Thomas returns. They'll be able to survive. And then once he's back, the offense should be much better. And overall, I think they'll mostly coast on their defense. They'll mostly rely on their defense, but I think the offense will be good enough to sustain this 9-8 record. And now, number 1 and the number 1 seed in the NFC, you all should have seen this coming, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, they have had like unprecedented levels of continuity on this defense. They won the Super Bowl and then brought back all of their starters, which is like never been seen before. It's like unheard of. So yeah, there's no reason to think that they should not be like just as good as last year, if not better, with added continuity. And they got Joe Tryon in the draft to make that defense even crazier than it already is. You obviously have Tom Brady, the deepest wide receiver core in the league, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, Tyler Johnson, Jalen Darden. Like all of those guys could start for most of the teams in the NFL, and they have them all on the same team. It's absolutely ridiculous how deep their wide receiver core is. And they have Rob Gronkowski and OJ Howard at tight end. So they have way too many weapons on offense. It's insane. And they have an elite offensive line. Tristan Wirfs was unheard of for like a rookie tackle. That he was insanely good. And then you've also got guys like Ali Marpet, Ryan Jensen, all kinds of talent on offense. It's ridiculous. And then they have probably the best front seven in the league with Levante David, Devin White, Ndamukong Suh, Vita Vea, who got injured last year, and they still won the Super Bowl, even though he's like a top 10 interior guy. Shaq Barrett, Antoine Winfield in the secondary. Like, the amount of talent on this roster is genuinely insane. They're the only team in the NFL that I can say doesn't have any weaknesses on their entire team. Like, their worst position is running back, which when that's your worst position, that is the position you would want to be your worst position. So yeah, this team is insane. I have them going 14-3. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they went undefeated. I'm not expecting that to happen. I'm not ever going to predict a team to go undefeated, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least. Like, this team is loaded, insane depth, insane top end talent, and I just don't see anyone really being better in the NFC. Now for what I consider to be the best division in the league, the NFC West. And this is going to shock a lot of people, but I have the Seahawks actually finishing last at 9-8. Now, I'm actually really interested to see how this offense performs this season, as they're going to be adopting the Shanahan offense that we talked about earlier with the Vikings and Packers. And I think Russell Wilson could really thrive in that kind of role, that kind of offense. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this ended up being like a top 5 offense, top 5 passing attack because of it. And if that happens, they'll probably finish better than this. But I'm not going to predict it to happen. We still have to see how that plays out. But more importantly, the offensive line, I know I've talked about the offensive line for like half of these teams already. You're probably getting sick of it already. But it's not great. They're pretty good at run blocking, but they definitely need to improve their pass blocking. The scheme change should benefit the offensive line in that regard, as you can manipulate the pocket and move things around a lot. But you still hopefully get some more consistency on that end. And I think the much bigger concern for this team is the defense, as you have Bobby Wagner and Jamal Adams, of course, who are both elite at their position, but not much outside of that. They brought in Carl Lawson last year, and he was good. But you don't really have any guys you can consistently rely on. You lost Shaquille Griffin to free agency, so your corner room is worse now. And overall, I just don't trust this defense. And I know I've been very negative about this team overall in this little summary, but the main reason I have them finishing last is because I just think this division is loaded. Every single team in this division is a legitimate playoff contender. I think that every team in this division can make a legit playoff run, like divisional round or beyond. And so someone had to finish last, and for me, it's the Seahawks. Now, finishing third in the division and getting the 6th seed in the NFC, I have the Cardinals. Now, the Cardinals are a very interesting team, as Kyler Murray's entering his 3rd year. They brought in AJ Green, who I honestly don't think is going to have a major role in this offense. I think it's going to be mainly Hopkins, Kirk, and Rondale Moore, who are getting the majority of the snaps, majority of the plays in this offense. But they brought in Rodney Hudson, which was a huge get for them. Getting an elite center for just a 3rd round pick was one of the best moves in this entire offseason. Really, the only thing that could hold this offense back, in my opinion, is Cliff Kingsbury, because I think he is currently one of the coaches on the hot seat. He's supposed to be like some offensive guru, and he just hasn't shown that in his first 2 years. So if he can do a good job coaching this year, good job play calling, scheming, all that stuff, then this offense should be borderline unstoppable. Like very, very, very good offense. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you brought in J.J. Watt, who should absolutely improve the interior of that line. I think he'll play a lot more interior than on the edge. And then you, of course, have Chandler Jones, who is probably a top 10 edge rusher in the league. He was coming off a season-ending injury last year, so you hope he can bounce back from that and go back to the guy he used to be, racking up like 15-plus sacks a season. You also have Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins as arguably the most versatile group of linebackers in the league, because Isaiah Simmons can really line up anywhere on the defense, and Zaven Collins is kind of like I said earlier with Micah Parsons. He can line up as a linebacker, he can blitz, he can rush the passer, he can do all kinds of things for you. And so that versatility should really help out that defense. And then you've got Budda Baker in the secondary, one of the best safeties in the league. You hope Byron Murphy can take a step up this season, become more of a number one high-end corner. If that happens, then this defense, you really need to look out for it. But overall, very talented roster, and as much as I don't really think Cliff Kingsbury is a very good coach, ultimately I think the talent on the roster prevails and gets this team into the playoffs at 10-7. Now, coming in second in the division, I've got the Rams going 12-5, which it just goes to show how insane this division is, that 12-5 is second. But yeah, they have Sean McVay, one of the best coaches in the NFL, one of the best offensive minds in the NFL. They have a good offensive line. It's not at the level that it was back in 2017, 18, I think, where it was like the best in the league. But they still have a good offensive line, though. They have great receivers, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Van Jefferson, Deshaun Jackson, really solid receivers, all of them. And then the big move of the offseason, getting Matthew Stafford in as their QB. Sean McVay clearly was just not satisfied with Jared Goff at this point. Wanted to see what he could do with not elite, but very good quarterback in Stafford. And I'm more than excited to see what he can do with him. This is probably going to be the team I'm looking after the most in this division, because I just can't wait to see what Sean McVay can do with a borderline top 10 QB. You know, you could put him in your top 10, you could leave him off. He's right in that range, and I think he's a dark horse for MVP. I don't think he wins MVP, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think if you had to bet on someone to win MVP and you wanted to like make the most of your money, I think Matt Stafford is a good bet. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I don't expect them to be quite as good as they were last year when they were like, I think, number one in the league, like statistically. They'll still be top 10 in my opinion. Anytime you have Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey on the same team, that's like automatically a top 10 defense, basically. But they lost John Johnson. They lost Brandon Staley, who was arguably the best defensive coordinator in the league last year. One of the main reasons this defense was so elite. So that's going to be a big blow, but it's still a very good defense. Shouldn't be too many concerns on that side of the ball. So when you combine the talent of this roster with Sean McVay's scheme, this is going to be a very good team and one of my favorites to potentially make the Super Bowl. So that, of course, leaves the 49ers winning the division and getting the number 2 seed in the NFC at 13-4. I feel like a lot of people have forgotten just how good this team was 2 years ago, because last year they had insane injury luck. It was crazy how many people they had hurt for them, and they still had like 6 wins, I think 6 or 7. So that just goes to show how good of a coach Kyle Shanahan is, in my opinion, the best offensive mind in the league. I know Andy Reid is up there for a lot of people. Andy Reid is second in my opinion. Kyle Shanahan is the guy at this point. So you have a crazy good front seven with Nick Bosa, Javon Kinlaw, who was a bit underwhelming last year, but definitely showed flashes. And I think, getting Bosa back on the line to play next to him, that should definitely make things easier on him. You have Fred Warner, who is, in my opinion, the best linebacker in the league at this point. You have Eric Armstead, just all kinds of talent along that defense. So it should be, just like the Rams, it should be a top 10 unit. And then you get to the real strength of this roster, which is the offense. Now, I know a lot of people think Jimmy Garoppolo is like some terrible QB, but don't forget, he took them to the Super Bowl just 2 years ago. They had a lead against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo at QB. So he's not a great QB, but he doesn't have to be when you have Kyle Shanahan calling plays behind this great offensive line, throw into George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and Deebo Samuel all day. Not to mention, this is probably the best running scheme in the league. Like, it seems like no matter who they put at running back, they always get insane production out of them. And now they actually have a great running back group with Mostert and Sermon, who I expect to take over that backfield by the end of the season. I know they typically like to use running back by committee, but I think Sermon, like the just overall talent he has, the ability to break tackles, his vision is just the kind of things that Shanahan is really going to want out of a running back, and I think he takes over that backfield. It says a lot that they were willing to spend a third-round pick on a running back when they already have such a great room in front of him. So I think that just goes to show how much they really like Trey Sermon and how involved he's going to end up being in this offense. And then, of course, you got Trey Lance. So Trey Lance is a bit of a question mark. We don't know if he's going to start week 1. We don't know if he's going to be starting by the end of the season or if it's just going to be Garoppolo the whole year. And I don't think it really matters too much to the outlook of this team, because I think whoever they start at QB, this team is still going to be up there among the best teams in the NFL. Now, obviously, if Trey Lance does end up starting at some point, that makes his run game just that much better, because now you have to account for him in the run game, which if you look at all these other teams like the Panthers from a few years ago, the Ravens, the Cardinals, like anytime you have a mobile QB, the Bears with Justin Fields this year, it will probably be similar. Anytime you have a mobile QB, that just automatically makes your run game that much harder to plan for, that much harder to stop. And when your run game is as big of a deal for your offense as it is here in San Francisco, Trey Lance could really take that offense to the next level if he can, still throw the ball at a high level. So overall, I think this is easily one of the best teams in the NFL. They should absolutely be competing for a Super Bowl, and I have them finishing 13-4 with the number 2 seed in the NFC. Now it's time to move on to the AFC, starting with the AFC North, where I have the Bengals finishing 4-13. Now, to be honest, it really hurt to give this team such a bad record, because I actually am really looking forward to watching this team. Joe Burrow is one of my favorite QBs in the league. I think he's already like a top 15 quarterback, almost top 10. Like, I don't think he's much worse than Herbert. He didn't get as much time to show it because of the injury, which we'll get into when we talk about the offensive line. But I think he's like right up there. I think Herbert's better, but not by much. And then, of course, they took Jamar Chase 5th overall, which I think was the wrong move. I would have taken Penei Sewell, but at the same time, I think Jamar Chase is an elite receiver prospect. And I know he's had all these problems with drops in the preseason, and I won't lie, I'm a little bit concerned about it, but not that much. I think it's just a matter of getting used to playing football again after he sat out last season. But I think he might start the season a little slow, but by midway through the season, he should be back to the elite receiver we saw back at LSU, putting up like 20 touchdowns, almost 2,000 receiving yards. And then that's not even mentioning T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, who I think are both among the most underrated receivers in the league. But at the end of the day, this offensive line is going to hold them back. I know they drafted Jackson Carman in the second round, who they're probably going to plug in at guard, but it's just not enough. They needed to make way more moves on this offensive line than they did. It's barely improved from last season. It's like it went from the worst offensive line in the league to a bottom 5 offensive line in the league. and that's just not good enough to finish much better than 4-13. I know they have some talent on the defensive side of the ball, namely Jesse Bates, who emerged as an elite safety in the league last year. But outside of him, they don't have much. They brought in Trey Hendrickson in free agency. They have Chidobe Awuzie at corner, but that's not really elite talent. Their defense should be better than last year, but still not very good. And in a division this tough, I don't see them finishing much better than 4-13, which is what I have them predicted. Now finishing third in the division, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers going 9-8. Now, if it wasn't for Mike Tomlin, I probably wouldn't expect this team to have a winning record. But when you've had like 15 straight winning seasons, it's hard to predict anything else. Ben Roethlisberger does not have it anymore, in my opinion. I think he's among the worst QBs in the league, but he's not as bad in terms of some of the other QBs where they like can't read a defense or they just make stupid decisions all the time. It's more so like his arm talent is not there anymore, and he still makes dumb decisions, but he's much more hesitant in the pocket. Like, he's not as decisive. Overall, I think he's just a very low ceiling, high floor type of guy, which that can work in this offense as they really want to throw short passes, run the ball with Najee Harris, which is why they drafted him in the first round. I firmly expect him to be like a top 10 running back in year one, because Najee Harris is an elite running back prospect in my eyes. But it might be hard for him to get the production if he's behind this offensive line, which is not good. It's not as bad as the Bengals, in my opinion, but it's certainly probably bottom 10 in the league. They lost DeCastro, Villanueva, and they didn't really do much to improve the offensive line. I would have much rather they drafted the offensive lineman instead of Freiermuth in the second round. As great as I think Freiermuth is going to be, offensive line is just a much bigger need for them. And there were good offensive linemen available that they just chose to pass on. So we'll see how that plays out. The offensive line, just like the Bengals, that's my main reason for concern with this team. The receiving core is very good. They have Juju, Claypool, and Deontay Johnson. And James Washington as your fourth receiver is a great option. I know he wants out. I think he requested a trade. We'll see how that plays out. But even without James Washington, they still have one of the better receiving cores in the league. And now the main reason why this team is not like among the worst in the league record-wise is because this defense is elite, especially the pass rush. Now, when you have TJ Watt, Melvin Ingram, and Cameron Hayward all on the defensive line, that is a nightmare for opposing quarterbacks. And that should make the job of the secondary much easier, as they don't have too much talent in the secondary, in my opinion. They have Minkah Fitzpatrick, who is a really good safety, but they don't have much talent at corner. They've got Joe Hayden, Cam Sutton. They just traded for Akella Witherspoon. So definitely not a bad secondary, but probably about average in the league. And then, Alex Highsmith is definitely a guy to look out for on the defensive line as an edge rusher. He could break out this season. He showed flashes last year. And as a rotational edge guy for them, he will probably have at least 5 sacks or so this season. He could be in for a breakout season, so that's a name to watch out for. And then you've got, of course, Devin Bush. They traded for Joe Schobert. So they've got a very, very talented defense, and I think that'll be the main reason. If they make the playoffs, that'll be the main reason why. But I don't think they'll be that great, mainly because of Big Ben and the lack of talent among the offensive line. So that's my main reason for concern, and the reason I have them only 9-8. Now at 12-5, I have the Ravens finishing second in the division and securing the 5 seed in the playoffs. There's a lot of reason to be optimistic about this Ravens team. You got Lamar Jackson, top 10 QB. You've got a very good run game. I know they lost J.K. Dobbins, but Gus Edwards should be able to step in and give you most of what you would have gotten with Dobbins. I still think Dobbins is the better running back, but Gus Edwards is definitely a good running back as well. And then you have a very good offensive line. Even though you lost Orlando Brown, still you still have Rodney Stanley on the other end of the ball, other side of the line. It's not as good as it used to be ever since Marshall Yanda retired, basically, but it's still among the better offensive lines in the league. And you still have a top 10 defensive unit. They drafted Odafe Owe in the first round. They got a very, very good secondary, among the best in the league. You got Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Tavon Young. Now, you do have questions at safety with Chuck Clark and Deshaun Elliott, I believe, are the starters for now. They've both shown signs in the past, but you question whether they can be a good starting duo for you. Patrick Queen, he was a first-round pick for them last year. He showed flashes, but not as consistent as you would like. But I definitely expect him to improve this season. I thought he was probably the best linebacker prospect last year. So you expect some big things from him this season. And overall, you just expect the front seven in general to take a step forward, as they always seem to get production out of those guys. It seems like no matter who they line up on the defensive line, they always manage to turn them into good players. And so you hope you can get some production out of your front seven. Calais Campbell's still there. Pernell McPhee, Justin Matabuike, who was a rookie for you last year. So, you got some talent along the line. Now, the biggest X factor for this team is going to be the passing game, because that has been the most inconsistent bit of this team basically since Lamar took over. I think Lamar is a good passer, but you really need to see him take that step up to the next level if you want this team to make a Super Bowl push. They drafted Rashad Bateman in the first round this year, which I thought was a great move. I thought he's a great prospect. He's injured for now. He's on IR. Hopefully he can come back and play healthy for you, because I think if he does, that's going to be huge for this passing game. They brought in Sammy Watkins in free agency. Maybe Hollywood Brown can take a step up this year. He really hasn't been the guy that you hoped when you drafted him back in 2018, I want to say. Overall, you still got Mark Andrews, who's a top 5 tight end in the league. So you've got talent. It's just a matter of if they can produce, if they can gel together, and if Lamar can make the most out of their talents. So if that all happens, they can absolutely make a run at the Super Bowl. But for now, I think they'll just be a very good team, not quite a Super Bowl team, which is why I have them 12-5, second in the division. So of course, all that means that I have the Browns finishing first in the division and actually securing the 1 seed in the AFC, believe it or not, with a 14-3 record. Now, this Browns roster is loaded. In my opinion, it's the best roster in the AFC. Obviously, the Chiefs have the better quarterback. But overall, if you take into account the overall roster, not counting quarterback, Browns definitely have them beat. They have the best offensive line in football. They have an elite running back duo, the best running back duo in the league, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt. Kevin Stefanski stepped in last year, bringing in the Shanahan offense that we talked about earlier, and it did wonders for Mayfield's development. So year 2 in that system, Baker should really be cooking now. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for that pun. But overall, this should be top 5 offense at worst. They have way too much talent. They're getting Odell back, which I've seen way too much Odell slander during the offseason. People talking he's not even a top 15 receiver. Just all kinds of crazy stuff. If you can get him in fantasy, he's going way too late in my opinion. I know this isn't a fantasy video, but that's a guy you should be targeting in my opinion. I know it's kind of late to be drafting, but it's never too late, I guess. And then of course you got Jarvis Landry in the slot. You've got Rashard Higgins, Donovan Peoples-Jones. Both of them have shown flashes in the past, definitely have upside there. I think DPJ will be the guy to take over as that number 3 receiver, that second outside receiver, whenever they're in 3 receiver sets. You got Austin Hooper, good tight end, a bit overpaid, but I mean, they had all kinds of cap space when they paid him, so I don't mind it. And now the defense is really exciting, as you have obviously Myles Garrett returning. You brought in Jadeveon Clowney, who is a good number 2 rusher, and when you've got him across from Myles Garrett, that is insane edge depth, or edge duo. You've got Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who you drafted in the 2nd round to improve that linebacker core, which was definitely the weakest part of this roster last year. If he can live up to what he was in Notre Dame, then that's going to be a steal in the 2nd round. If he can stay healthy and play at that level, that's a huge pick for them. You got a very good secondary now. Like, they've made some big improvements to the secondary. It might be top 5 in the league at this point. You got Denzel Ward, who is probably a top 10 corner in the league. You have Greedy Williams, who hasn't gotten to play much, but when he's on the field, he's definitely a really good corner. And then you obviously drafted Greg Newsome this year. And then you have Grant Delpit, who didn't get to play at all last year because he was injured, but was definitely one of the best safeties in the league, in the draft last year, in my opinion. And then, of course, you bring in John Johnson from the Rams. And just all around, this is just a loaded secondary. They have really no hole. They have 3 really good corners and 2 good safeties. There's not very few teams in the NFL can say that. And so when you just combine the talent on this roster with Kevin Stefanski's scheme and his just overall coaching, this should be one of the best teams in the league. And as you'll see later, I have very high hopes for this team. So I have them finishing 14-3, number 1 seed in the AFC. Moving on to the AFC East, I have the Jets finishing last, as you would probably expect, but what you might not expect is that I actually have them going 8-9. From what I've seen, a lot of people think the Jets are going to be like among the worst teams in the NFL. I just do not see that happening. They brought in Robert Saleh from the Niners to be the new head coach. Obviously, I don't need to say that he's obviously a better coach than Adam Gase. You all know that. But his influence on this defense is what's really going to help out this team, because their defense is the most underrated unit in the entire NFL. I have seen so much disrespect to this Jets defense, talking about how it's terrible. They have no talent on defense when they have one of the best front sevens in the league in an absolutely elite run defense. Now, run defense isn't all that important in the league for most teams, but against teams like the Patriots, which we'll go into later, who should be a very run-heavy team, and then various other teams in the league, that's really going to help them out. They have Folarenzu Fatukasi, who's probably the best nose tackle in the league at this point. Quinnen Williams, who is a top 10 interior defensive lineman. No one talks about him because he's on the Jets, but he really broke out last year, and I think he could be even better this year, which would be huge for this defense. Obviously, they lost Carl Lawson for the year, which really hurts this defense, because without that injury, I think this would be among the best defensive lines in the league. They brought in Shaq Lawson to replace him, but he's just not the same level of edge rusher that Carl Lawson was. So that's a big blow to their edge rush. But they still have an elite interior and a very good linebacker in CJ Mosley. Now, the secondary is definitely the weakest spot of this defense, but their safety duo is pretty good. They have Marcus May, who was very good last year. They now have LaMarcus Joyner, who should be, a decent safety for them. And then the cornerback is their main concern on defense. You have Bryce Hall and Javelin Guidry are the 2 guys that you really want to step up this season. You want to see some improvement from them. Bryce Hall definitely shown flashes, like a lot of players we talked about so far. But if he can, take a next step up and become more of a number 1 corner for them, that would be huge. And then the main reason I'm so optimistic about this team is their offense. Now, you brought in Mike LaFleur to be your offensive coordinator, so this is another team that's going to be implementing the Shanahan offense this year. And you draft Elijah Vera Tucker to improve the interior of that offensive line, which, when paired with Mekhi Becton and, Connor McGovern, Greg Van Roten, solid interior guys, they have a good offensive line now, in my opinion. Not great, but it'll definitely be good enough to, do the things they want to do with this offense. And then, of course, you draft Zach Wilson number 2 overall, which in a Shanahan offense, that is literally a dream scenario. That is a perfect scheme fit for him because he thrives on play action passes, throwing on the run, moving the pocket, all kinds of things that are like necessary to run the Shanahan offense. So you have all those improvements, not to mention the improved receiving core, as you now have Corey Davis as your number 1 receiver, who is very underrated last year. No one really talks about him because A.J. Brown was the man in Tennessee, but Corey Davis had a really good year last year. He was very close to a 1,000-yard season. Definitely the best year of his career, in my opinion. And I think he could absolutely step up and be the number 1 guy for them. We saw in the preseason he was getting targeted like crazy, and I expect that to kind of continue in the regular season. We'll get into that. Jamison Crowder, very good slot receiver. I don't know how much he'll play now that they have Elijah Moore, who I expect to fully break out this season. I don't really know how you could say a rookie's going to break out. I don't like saying rookies are breaking out. But he, very good receiver that they got in the 2nd round. He's incredible route runner, great after the catch. Zach Wilson's going to love him. He's going to pepper him with targets. So that's another guy you should target in fantasy, in my opinion. You have Keelan Cole, Denzel Mims, who was a 2nd round pick from last season that we didn't get to see too much of him, but when he was on the field, he looked good. So actually a very deep receiving core that I don't think enough people are talking about. It will be kind of hard to get all these guys the playing time that they probably deserve. And then Zach Wilson overall, I haven't talked about him that much. I mentioned he was a perfect scheme fit, but he's also was my number 2 QB in this draft and the person I'm expecting to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. It's kind of a spoiler for a video I got coming out soon, but yeah, I expect Zach Wilson to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. I think in this scheme, combined with the receiving core around him and the fact that I think people are going to be trying to give it to anyone other than Trevor Lawrence just because of how hyped up he's been. I think Zach Wilson has a really good shot at the award this year. And overall, I think this roster combined with the coaching staff is just too good to be like 3-14, which I've seen a lot of people predict like 3 or 4 wins for this team. I think this team is going 8-9. I wouldn't be that surprised if they made the playoffs, if we're being completely honest. Coming in 3rd in the division, we have the Dolphins going 9-8. I know a lot of people expect this team to, compete for the division title. But Tua is the main reason. Like a lot of teams we discussed, the quarterback is the main crux of this team and their success. And Tua was just not very good last year. Now, obviously, he wasn't in a great scenario, but the offensive line isn't much improved from where it was at last year. They drafted Liam Eichenberg, who would be best used at tackle, but they seem to be dead set on playing him at guard for some reason. And they added Jalen Waddle in the draft, who is a great receiver, in my opinion. But I don't know if Tua is really going to make all that much use of him because he's a great deep threat, but Tua doesn't really chuck the ball downfield all that often. It's not like he's afraid to do it or anything. He'll do it every now and then, but not to the extent that I think you would need to make full use of that pick, especially when Penei Sewell was on the board and you desperately need to shore up this offensive line for a QB that's not that mobile. He can move around a bit, but he's no like Justin Fields, So I have some major questions about this offense, but the defense should be very good, especially with Brian Flores coaching those guys up. They drafted Jalen Phillips with, I believe, the 18th pick in the draft, who should be very good this year, among the best defensive rookies. I think he definitely has the talent to reach double-digit sacks as a rookie. We'll see if he actually does it because he's definitely has some injury concerns, which is the main reason he fell in the draft. But, coming from Miami, being drafted by Miami, they probably have good access to, medical information and all that. So if they were confident enough to draft him in the 1st round, then I'm confident enough that he'll be able to stay relatively healthy. And then, of course, you've got Byron Jones, Xavier Howard in the secondary. You've got Eric Rowe at safety. Jason McCourty. You just drafted Javon Holland, who I believe is another very underrated player from this class. So overall, the defense should be very good, just like last year. I don't think they'll have quite as many takeaways as they did, but their talent is better than it was last year, which I believe will keep them in a lot of games, regardless of whether or not Tua can really take a step up, which is why, even though I don't really trust the offense, I still have them finishing 9-8 and third in the division. Now I have the New England Patriots finishing 10-7, second in the division, in the 7th seed in the AFC. Now, the amount of talent that they added in this offseason is actually insane. They brought in Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne in free agency. They had brought in Jalen Mills, Matt Judon, Henry Anderson on the defensive side of the ball. Not to mention they getting back Donta Hightower from opt-out last year, who that was a big blow to their defense last year, not having him. And then they draft Mac Jones, obviously, to be their new QB. Now, I wasn't super high on Jones coming out, but going to this team with an elite offensive line in front of him, good play calling, good coaching, and especially with how he looked in the preseason, I'm definitely much more optimistic about his success now than I was, say, in March, especially when this offense is probably going to be very run heavy, so he won't be relied on to, carry the offense at all. It'll be a lot of short passes too, relying on your receivers and your tight ends to get yards after the catch, which they are great at, especially Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. That tight end duo, they'll be running a lot of 12 personnel, make things easier on both the running game and Mac Jones himself. So I think this offense will be good enough to sustain success, especially when you have this great of a defense. I believe this defense is going to be top 5 in the league. Like, this is arguably the most underrated defense in the league. I don't hear nearly enough people talking about how good it is. We mentioned before they brought in Matt Judon. They're getting Donta Hightower back. But they also have Christian Barmore, who they somehow managed to get in the second round, which was a steal. They have Chase Winovich coming off the edge. He was pretty good for them last year. He, getting more coaching from Belichick in a regular offseason. Maybe he can take a step forward. And then the secondary, which is the main reason I'm so high on this defense. This secondary is loaded. They have Devin McCourty, Adrian Phillips, Kyle Duggar, who is, I fully expect to take that step up and become like a borderline top 10 safety in the league this year. J.C. Jackson, who is arguably the most underrated corner in the league. Stephon Gilmore, who is currently hurt, but when he's back healthy, if he's playing for them, you assume he's going to be playing for them. He's unhappy about his contract, but I trust the Patriots. I trust their front office to work something out with him. So when he's back, he had a bit of a down year last year, but he's still a top 5 corner in the league. So you just have a loaded secondary, a good front 7, like a very good run defense, elite offensive line, elite coaching. Bill Belichick is still at worst the second best coach in the league. So there's just way too many factors going into this team's favor for me to have them any worse than 10-7. And then, of course, number 1 in the division, number 2 seed in the AFC, I have the Bills going 14-3. The Bills are in position to have one of the best passing attacks in the league, which will always put you in position to have success in the league. They have a very good defense, especially in the secondary with Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Teron Johnson. They drafted Greg Rousseau, who should really help out that pass rush, and especially the run defense. He's a much better run defender than pass rusher, in my opinion, but he is a physical freak, so I think he will, once he gets some coaching from Sean McDermott, gets to learn behind guys like Jerry Hughes, he should definitely develop into a good pass rusher. And you've got Matt Milano, who's one of the best pass defending linebackers in the league. Like, in coverage, he's among the best in the league, probably like second or third best behind guys like Fred Warner, Eric Kendricks. And then you have Ed Oliver, who was really hyped up for them when they drafted him, I believe 2 years ago now. He hasn't quite lived up to the pedigree that he had pre-draft, but you hope maybe you can get something from him this year with the added help around him. And then, of course, as we get back into that passing game, you have a good offensive line. You have Josh Allen, who is a borderline elite QB, top 5 QB in the league, no doubt. You definitely have concerns about possible regression, but I think he'll be just as good, if not better, than he was last year. And as long as that's the case, this is going to be an elite offense. Stephon Diggs, obviously, Cole Beasley, Dawson Knox at tight end, who I expect to take a bit of a step up this season. You add Emmanuel Sanders, who should help out that receiving core a bit. He's not the same guy that he used to be, but he's still a good receiver. He's good depth for them. Should definitely shore up the passing game a bit. And so, yeah, overall, very good offense, among the best in the league, and a very good defense as well. Should keep this team in Super Bowl contention just like they were last year. And I have them going 14-3. Now, the AFC South is where we get to what I believe will be the worst team in the league this year, and that is the Houston Texans. I have them finishing 1-16 and obviously last in the division. The Texans, man. There's not much to be excited about if you're a fan of this team. Obviously, the Deshaun Watson allegations, drama, like we don't know what's going on with all that, but we do know that he's more than likely not going to play for them this year. If he plays at all this year. And so you're stuck with guys like Tyrod Taylor and Davis Mills as your QBs. Tyrod Taylor isn't a horrible QB. He can get the job done for you if you have a good surrounding core around you. Unfortunately for the Texans, they do not have a good surrounding core. You have Laramie Tunsil at left tackle for you, who is a very, very good tackle, but not much else among the offensive line. You have Brandon Cooks at receiver. You traded for Anthony Miller, so you have a decent receiver core, but not much to be excited about, especially when Tyrod is your quarterback. You would like to have better options than that. So the offense isn't very good. You don't have very good running backs that you can lean on either. And then the defense is really bad. Justin Reed is probably your best player on that side of the ball, which is not good because as much as I like Justin Reed, he's probably above average at best. I think he could take a step up this season, as they rely more on him more than ever, really. But you definitely want to have better options than that on that side of the ball. You don't really have anything in terms of pass rushers. You have like Malik Collins is probably your best pass rusher, which isn't good. You hope maybe Charles Omenihu can take a step forward, but not much to get excited about on the defensive side of the ball. And then your head coach is David Culley, which isn't really anything to be excited about in my opinion. We'll see how he does, but I don't think he's really all that great of a head coach. So yeah, there's really nothing to be excited about on this team. I honestly feel bad for any Texans fans watching. Yeah, I just don't see this team being good at all. I don't see any outcome where they end up as a good team. So I have them 1-16, last in the division and last in the entire NFL, really. Next up, we have the Jaguars finishing 4-13. They obviously got Trevor Lawrence, number 1 overall, one of the best QB prospects we've seen in recent memory. You pair that with a good receiving core. You've got DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault, Marvin Jones. So you have good receiving options, or at least wide receivers. You don't really have any good tight ends. Like your number 1 tight end on your depth chart right now is James O'Shaughnessy. So, not very good at tight end. And then you also don't have a very good offensive line either. You've got pieces, Cam Robinson, Andrew Norwell, Brandon Linder. Those are all solid players. Jawan Taylor was kind of disappointing in my opinion last year. I expected him to be much better than he was. We'll see how he improves this year, if he improves. You unfortunately lose ETN for the season, which is a big blow, mainly to the passing game. I think he would be much more involved in the passing game than running, because you still have James Robinson to run the ball, between the tackles and that power running aspect. And then the defense should be better than last year, but still not very good. You have Josh Allen, who is a very underrated edge rusher. Miles Jack, very good linebacker, but not much else in that department in the front seven. Kayvon Chason was, I believe, a first-round pick for them last year. Didn't quite live up to that pedigree. We'll see what he can do this year, but kind of disappointing last year. You bring in Shaq Griffin in free agency to go along with C.J. Henderson, who I don't know what's going on with him. Apparently, I don't know if he asked for the trade. I don't remember if he asked for it or if the team just wants to trade him. But I would not trade him because I still believe he's one of the best young corners in the league. He missed a lot of games last year, but when he was on the field, he looked very good, in my opinion. You also drafted Tyson Campbell to help out that secondary a bit. So you've got pieces in the secondary, but not much in the front seven. So it should be definitely better defense than last year. It won't be like bottom of the league or anything, but probably about average at best. So you pair that with Urban Meyer, who I think he's one of the best college coaches of all time, but I honestly don't expect him to be a very good NFL coach. We'll see if he proves me wrong. I kind of hope he does, to be honest, but we'll see. So for now, I just have the Jaguars going 4-13, finishing third in the division. Now, second in the division, I have the Colts finishing 6-11, which I was very surprised I had them that low. 6-11, very surprising to me, as it probably is to many of you as well. But I'm completely out on Carson Wentz. Even if he plays all 17 games this season, I don't think they get very good quarterback play out of him. Even in this scheme, Frank reuniting with Frank Reich, I just don't think he has it anymore. He was very good like 2017, 2018, but I just don't think he's the same QB anymore. And on top of that, Quentin Nelson is hurt for now, who I believe is the second best offensive lineman in the league. That's not going to help at all. Your receiving core is not very good, especially with this T.Y. Hilton injury. You're relying on Michael Pittman, Zach Pascal, and Paris Campbell. For now, it's not that great, but I definitely think Paris Campbell specifically is the name I'm keeping an eye on. He was very, very good in, I think, like the first game of the season last year. I think that was the only game he was healthy for, but he was very good in that game. So if he can return to that form and stay healthy throughout the season, that's a name to look out for. He could definitely help out this offense. And then the defense is very good. You have DeForest Buckner along the interior. You have Darius Leonard, who I believe is a bit overrated, but still a good linebacker. Probably among 7th or 8th best in the league, around that range. Your secondary is solid. You got Kenny Moore, Xavier Rhodes, who was much better last year than he was in his last year in Minnesota. Julian Blackmon, who is one of the better young safeties in the league. Rock Ya-Sin, he hasn't quite lived up to that, I believe, early second round pick that he was a few years ago. But, it's too early to give up on him, in my opinion. He's still got some potential. You've just got a lot of good pieces on defense. It'll probably be a top 15 unit. I think it's a bit overrated by Colts fans. It's not like an elite defense, but it's very good. Ultimately, this whole roster is pretty good. I just do not believe in Carson Wentz anymore. So obviously, if he returns to that MVP form that he used to have, then obviously they'll be much better than 6-11. But I don't see it happening, so I'm not going to predict it. I have the Colts finishing second in the division at 6-11, which of course leaves the Titans at number 1, getting the 4 seed in the AFC at 12-5. Now, their offense is insanely talented now with the addition of Julio Jones. You lose Jonnu Smith, but getting Julio Jones more than makes up for that, in my opinion. Your offensive line is good, but not great. It could definitely be better. You, of course, are still going to be heavily relying on Derrick Henry, as I believe they're still running the Shanahan scheme, even though they lost Arthur Smith to the Falcons. You have some questions about how effective it can still be without Arthur Smith, who was one of the best play callers in the league last year. And you somewhat wonder how good Tannehill can be when he's out of structure, when the running game is not working, because in the past, Anytime they can't get Derrick Henry going, their entire offense kind of shuts down. They have better receivers now, so you hope that can fix that problem, but it's still kind of a wait and see approach on that. But overall, this offense should be among the best in the league. With that much talent, A.J. Brown, Julio Jones, Derrick Henry, it's hard to believe that they will struggle on offense, but there's definitely some questions. And then you have even more questions on the defensive side of the ball. You bring in Bud Dupree to help out that pass rush. Hopefully he and Harold Landry can form a good edge duo. Jeffrey Simmons is absolutely a name to watch this season. I fully expect him to break out, become a top 10 interior presence and become a real force on the interior for that pass rush. In the secondary, you've got Kevin Byard, who is a top 10 safety, probably top 5. You hope some of the corners around him can step up. Christian Fulton, second-round pick for them last year. Not quite what you hope for in year 1, but hopefully he can step it up in year 2. You hope Janoris Jenkins can become a key contributor for you. And then, of course, Caleb Farley, who you drafted this year. If he's healthy, which was the main reason he fell in the draft, but if he's healthy, he is arguably the best corner in the draft, in my opinion, and that's saying something. In the draft with Patrick Surtain and J.C. Horn and Greg Newsome, all these great corners. So it's just a lot of question marks on the defensive side of the ball, but overall, even if the defense struggles again, the offense should be good enough to pick up most of the slack, which is why I have them finishing 12-5 and winning the division. And now, finally, we move on to the AFC West, where I have the Raiders finishing last at 5-12. Now, a lot of people are going to think that's a low record prediction for them, but I personally don't agree. Their offense should be pretty good. I think John Gruden is a good play caller. As much as he is not very good with his front office decisions, he's good at calling plays, so that should help out the offense. You have Josh Jacobs, of course, a very good running back. Henry Ruggs, a bit of a disappointment last year, but you hope he can step up and live up to that 12th overall selection that he was last year. Bryan Edwards is a guy you really hope takes a step forward this year. Can become your red zone threat besides Darren Waller, obviously, who is an elite tight end. But you hope Bryan Edwards can become more of that outside threat among your receivers. And then the main reason why I have questions about this offense is the offensive line, which was among the best in the league last year, probably top 5, definitely top 10, arguably top 5. And then it completely decimated. They lost Trent Brown, they lost Rodney Hudson, they lost Gabe Jackson, and I don't see this being a good unit this year. I know they drafted Alex Leatherwood in the first round, but that was definitely a bad pick in my eyes. I don't think he belonged anywhere near the first round as a tackle, maybe as a guard, but they're not playing him at guard because they need someone to play tackle for them. So I don't expect this offensive line to be any good at all, which is really going to hurt this offense, in my opinion, and is the main reason why I'm so low on them. But the main reason I'm so low on this team is the defense. I fully expect this to be a bottom 5 defense in the league. They have very little talent on that side of the ball, in my opinion. They have Casey Hayward and Trevon Merrick in the secondary, and that's about it in my eyes. They have Yannick Ngakoue, who is a solid edge rusher, a bit overrated. Well, I don't know. People have kind of woken up to what he really is. He was overrated, but I think he's a bit fairly rated now. Corey Littleton and Nick Kwiatkowski, they signed last year. Neither of them really lived up to expectations. Jonathan Abram is one of the worst safeties in the league at this point. You drafted Damon Arnett in the first round last year. That was another reach of a first-round pick in my eyes. He hasn't really shown anything to make you believe that it was a good pick. You hope he can be as solid as your third or fourth best corner. But you have really nothing in the way of pass rush. I know Max Crosby gets a lot of love from Raiders fans, but I don't think he's all that great. Cleveland Farrell was better last year, but still not very impressive. He's a solid number 2 edge rusher, but you don't have any kind of elite presence among your defensive line, and you don't have any elite presence anywhere on your defense, really. So I think this is going to be a bottom 5 defense in the league. And when you combine that with a questionable offense, I just don't see this team being all that good. So I have them finishing 5-12. They won't be horrible. They'll have a lot of close games. They won't be like a terrible team. They'll hang in there with a lot of other teams, but I just don't see them finishing with a good record. Now, third in the division at 8-9, I have the Denver Broncos, which are a really tough team to analyze because outside the quarterback, this roster is very, very good. Like, I don't say this lightly, but I genuinely believe they are a quarterback away from being a Super Bowl contender. Like, there are really no holes on this roster outside of quarterback, which is why I believe they will strongly regret passing on Justin Fields in the draft. But getting into the rest of the roster, they have a good offensive line. Garrett Bowles took a real step up last year, became a dependable, good tackle for them. You have a really good receiving core with Jerry Jeudy, who you hope can take a step forward this year. He was an elite route runner last year, but had very questionable hands. You hope he can shore that up a bit, become more of a reliable catcher of the football. You got KJ Hamler as a deep threat. You've got Courtland Sutton, who is the most underrated receiver in the entire NFL. People seem to forget how good he was like 2 years ago because he missed basically all of last season with a ACL injury, I believe. But he's among the top 10 to 15 best receivers in the league when healthy. So you hope he can stay healthy again. And then Noah Fant, really good tight end, top 10 in the league. So just a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball, but even more talent on the defense. So they have an elite edge rush duo in Bradley Chubb and Von Miller. If those guys can stay healthy, which is a pretty big if at this point, but if they can stay healthy, that's a top 5 edge rush duo in the league at worst. They have an elite secondary, one of the best in the league, the best safety duo in the league with Kareem Jackson and Justin Simmons. And then you have Kyle Fuller, Patrick Surtain, and Bryce Callahan, who is probably the best slot corner in the league at this point. So it's just all kinds of loaded in the secondary. Alexander Johnson is also an underrated linebacker for them. So they have way too much talent on defense and offense, really, for this team to be any worse than 8-9, really. I think this is honestly about their floor, especially now that they have Bridgewater as a bit of a higher floor quarterback for them, because Drew Lock, very volatile. So, they're planning on starting Teddy Bridgewater. That should make things a bit more stable for them. And as long as they're not turning the ball over all the time, they should be at least decent. I just wish they had a better quarterback like Justin Fields. I understand that Surtain was on the board, great prospect. I'm not going to criticize them for taking such a good player. I just really think they should have taken Fields. So a great roster that I believe will be a bit burdened by their QB play, which is why I have them finishing 8-9 and third in the division. Next, at the 6th seed, finishing 10-7, I have the Chargers. So Justin Herbert was amazing last year, a lot better than I expected. I thought he was a reach at 6th overall last year. I thought they needed to either take Jordan Love or just wait on a QB. But yeah, they obviously proved me wrong. Justin Herbert was one of the best rookie QBs we've ever seen, and now he's got an even better roster and a better coach. So they bring in Brandon Staley as their new head coach. That should really help out the defense, which was already a good unit. They had Joey Bosa, Derwin James, Chris Harris, and now Asante Samuel Jr., who is a really good prospect that had no business falling to the second round, by the way. So you've got talent on the defensive side of the ball. You also have Kenneth Murray at linebacker, who hopefully can take another step forward this year. He was solid last year. Hopefully he can be even better this year. But even if he's not, you got Brandon Staley coaching those guys up. And with that pass rush and secondary, they should be a very good defense. And then, of course, the offense is the most exciting part of this team, as you have Justin Herbert at QB, obviously. You have Austin Eckler back and healthy, who is a very good receiving back. You have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams at receiver. You have Jared Cook, who is old but still good at tight end. And then you vastly improved the offensive line, which was probably the weakest spot of this offense last year. You bring in Corey Linsley, arguably the best center in the league. I have no idea why Green Bay was okay letting him go, but, one man's trash is another man's treasure, or whatever. So you get Corey Linsley at center, and then you draft Rashawn Slater at 13 overall, which is an absolute steal. Some people had him as the best tackle in this class. I disagree, but I still think he's a very good tackle. And you've got some questions at guard, but when you have Corey Linsley, Rashawn Slater, and then Brian Bulaga when healthy, it doesn't really matter who your guards are as long as they're not a complete liability, which they're not. So this team is just very good overall. They got Justin Herbert, who should take another step forward this year with all the help surrounding him. And Brandon Staley should have the defense even better than ever. So overall, this is a very good team that should be really close with pretty much any team they play this year, and which is why I have them finishing 10-7, second in the division. And then finally, as you all expected, Kansas City Chiefs, first in the division, 14-3, but only the 3 seed in the AFC. I don't think that's any indictment on the Chiefs so much as it is just how the tiebreakers played out and how good some of the other teams in the AFC are. They obviously have Patrick Mahomes, the best QB in the league. They have Travis Kelce, arguably the best tight end in the league. I would personally put Kittle above him, but I completely understand if you think Kelce's better. I won't argue that at all. They vastly improved the offensive line, which is one of the main reasons they struggled so much in the Super Bowl. Brought in Orlando Brown. They brought in Joe Tooney. And then they managed to get both Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith in the draft, which is insane. Both of them fell way too far, in my opinion. So that's one of the main reasons to be optimistic for this season is the extent that they improved the offensive line. Now, you have Tyreek Hill, but you don't really have anyone else behind him, at least no one proven behind him. You have Mecole Hardman, who you really hope can step up this year because there's really no one else. Demarcus Robinson is there, but he's not a reliable receiving threat. You have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who is a very good receiving back, so hopefully that'll help out the passing game also. You also hope he can take a step up as a runner. He was really good in week 1 and then kind of slowed down after that, so you hope he can be a bit more consistent as a runner. And then moving on to the defense, you've got Chris Jones, obviously, who's actually playing a bit of edge rusher now. They plan to play him a bit on the edge this year, so we'll see how that works out for him. I think that could be a really big move, honestly, if that works out. Kind of a Calais Campbell type of edge rusher as a really big physical power rusher on the edge. He'll still, of course, play a lot of interior as well, but mixing it up a little can make it a bit harder to plan for him. You've got Charvarius Ward and L'Jarius Sneed at corner. Sneed was very surprising last season. If he can continue to develop, become a number 1 corner, then that would be huge for that defense because it's solid. They have some great playmakers on the defense, but it's still not a great unit overall. You of course have Tyrann Mathieu at safety, one of the best safeties in the league. Some would say he's the best. I wouldn't quite put him as the best, but definitely up there in that conversation. And then you draft Nick Bolton, who is a very good run defender at linebacker. If he can continue to be the kind of impact that he was in Missouri, then that could be really big for this defense in terms of run defense, which has been a bit of a question mark for them in the past. But yeah, overall, we know why the Chiefs are great. You got Andy Reid calling plays. You got Patrick Mahomes executing the plays. As long as that's the case, you're always going to be in contention for a Super Bowl, pretty much. So yeah, 14-3, number one in the division, 3 seed in the AFC, your Kansas City Chiefs. And now moving on to the playoff predictions. I'll try and move through these pretty quick because this video is way too long as is. So starting in the NFC, we've got the 7-seeded Saints taking on the 2-seeded Niners. And overall, I think the Niners are just a much better overall roster, and they should just be able to handle business at home. Niners win, move on to the divisional round. Next up, the 6-seeded Cardinals take on the 3-seeded Cowboys, and this should be a much closer game. The Cardinals, obviously, like we talked about earlier, great talent on offense and defense, really. But the Cowboys playing at home, I think they have overall the better offense, and I don't think the Cardinals have the secondary to hang with the receivers that Dallas has, and I don't think they have the physicality to deal with Ezekiel Elliott in the run game either. So I think overall, Cowboys offense is too much to handle, and they move on to the second round. Next up, the 5-seeded Rams take on the 4-seeded Packers. This should be the closest game out of all of these in the NFC. Packers, obviously, Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, elite passing duo, but I think the Rams are able to slow down Devontae Adams with Jalen Ramsey, and the Packers don't really have any reliable receiving threats outside of that, at least not yet. We'll see how that plays out during the season, but I think that allows their offense to slow down just enough for the Rams to be able to win the game. Very close game, I would expect, but I have the Rams moving on to the second round. Now in the AFC, the 7-seeded Patriots take on the 2-seeded Bills. Divisional matchup in the first round of the playoffs. Those are always interesting. But I have the Bills winning out in the end. I know I talked about how great the Patriots defense is, but I don't think the Patriots offense has enough firepower to hang with the Bills in the playoffs, especially not in Buffalo. In a cold weather game, Mac Jones doesn't have the strongest arm. That passing offense might struggle a bit, so I have the Bills winning out. Next, the 6-seeded Chargers take on the 3-seeded Chiefs, another divisional matchup, and I have the Chiefs winning out in the end, mainly just too much firepower for the Chargers to handle. Justin Herbert hasn't proven to be as elite as Patrick Mahomes, obviously. Not to mention they don't really have the outside corner talent to hang with, Tyreek Hill. And, the Chiefs upgraded the offensive line enough to kind of handle this Chargers pass rush. So I think they should be able to ultimately win the game. Maybe pretty close, but ultimately the Chiefs move on. And now the 5-seeded Ravens take on the 4-seeded Titans, which I think will be a very good matchup. I think it's a rematch of the wild card round from last year, and I think this is a really good matchup. Ultimately, I think the Ravens are hopefully healthy by this time with Rashad Bateman being good to go, and I think that's going to be the difference. I don't think the Titans defense is physical enough to hang with the Ravens running game, and once their passing attack is healthy, that element combined with the physicality of the run game should be a little bit too much for the Titans to handle. I think the Ravens defense will be able to slow down the Titans offense enough for the Ravens to pull out a close win, and they move on to the second round. Now, back to the NFC, we have the Rams taking on the Buccaneers, which is another good matchup in my opinion. But I think the Buccaneers ultimately are just too much to handle for the Rams. Their offensive line should be able to slow down Aaron Donald, and they don't really have the edge rushers to take advantage of that. The Rams don't. Also, I think Jalen Ramsey could potentially shut down Mike Evans in this game, but they still have Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown to handle, which I like Darius Williams as much as the next guy, but I don't think those guys are going to be enough to shut down this passing attack. And then, the Buccaneers have an elite run defense, and the Rams offense is completely predicated on running the ball. So, they'll be able to slow them down enough to pull out a win and move on to the conference championship. And then we have the Niners taking on the Cowboys.
The Niners, just a better team. Cowboys, as much as I talked up their passing attack, they have a very bad run defense, even though they improved it this year, bringing in guys like Brent Urban. Still not a very good run defense, and so the Niners should be able to run all over them, control the clock, and ultimately win the game. Now in the AFC, we have Browns versus Ravens, yet another divisional matchup in the AFC playoffs. I promise I did not do this intentionally. It's just the way I see things playing out. But the Browns, just a better roster overall. I think they'll be really gelling at this point. I think Kevin Stefanski will have this offense completely figured out. They'll just be firing on all cylinders. I think the Browns' pass rush will be a bit too much for the Ravens' offensive line to handle. And I think the Ravens will really struggle to throw the ball against this secondary, which ultimately leads the Browns to a win and a trip to the AFC Championship. Next up, we got Bills versus Chiefs, which is honestly the toughest game for me to predict in these entire playoffs. It's a genuine toss-up in my eyes. Like, this is a genuine 50-50 game. But ultimately, I'm going with the Chiefs. I just trust Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid more than Josh Allen and Brian Dable as his play caller. I also think the Chiefs will be able to generate just enough pressure to, kind of get to Josh Allen a bit more than the Bills will be able to get to Patrick Mahomes. So ultimately, I think the Chiefs pull out a very close game and move on to the AFC Championship for the 4th year in a row now. Moving back to the NFC, we have the Niners taking on the Buccaneers in the NFC Championship. And I think the Buccaneers are kind of the perfect matchup for the Niners, as, like I said earlier, they have a very good run defense. Much like how they can shut down the Rams in the last round, they'll probably have a similar game plan this week for the Niners. Also, I don't think the Niners have the secondary to hang with the Buccaneers receivers. They're going to be throwing the ball like all over the place. I think both teams will be very pass heavy in this matchup. But if that resorts to that, Tom Brady's a better QB than both Garoppolo and Trey Lance, really. And the Buccaneers have the better receiving options. So ultimately, I think the Buccaneers win out in this one and move on to the Super Bowl for the 2nd year in a row. In the AFC, we got the Browns taking on the Chiefs in the AFC Championship in Cleveland. And I'm going to do it. I'm saying the Browns are going to beat the Chiefs and move on to the Super Bowl. I think the Browns secondary is good enough to slow down the Chiefs a bit. And the Chiefs just don't have the front 7 to really get after both the passing attack and the run game for the Browns with that elite offensive line. I think they'll be able to run the ball, as the Chiefs don't have a very good run defense, which effectively sets up play action. Baker gets hot. And I know this all sounds kind of crazy, but don't forget the Browns are actually leading the Chiefs in Arrowhead in the playoffs last year. So with an improved roster and the game being in Cleveland, the fans are going to be going crazy. They're finally going to get a chance to go to the Super Bowl. That stadium is going to be insane. So I think the Browns end up pulling off a win, a surprise upset, and make it all the way to the Super Bowl where they take on the Bucs. Now, as much as I just talked up the Browns, I think their Cinderella story ends here. This will be the 3rd game in a row that the Buccaneers have to take on a Shanahan outside zone offense, so they'll be more than prepared to take on the Browns. I think Tom Brady, with way too much experience in the Super Bowl, is able to outduel Baker Mayfield and ultimately just come out with his 8th ring, which is just frustrating to actually say out loud. But yeah, that'll do it for my season predictions. If you stuck around this long, you had to have liked the video. So, go ahead, drop a like, subscribe, all that jazz. I'll be back very soon for award predictions. Check out who I think wins MVP, Offensive Player of the Year, Offensive Rookie of the Year, all that stuff, Coach of the Year, you know the drill. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.